In the Second World War, more than in any other previous conflict, civilians were thrust into the front line. Germany's Blitz of Britain cities in 1940 to 1941 was the first sustained attempt to destroy a country's industries and terrorize its people by bombing from the air. It would not be the last. On Saturday, 7 September 1940, the Luftwaffe launched its first major raid on London, the Blitz. As Germany's bombing campaign became known in Britain was about to begin. That day, 300 aircraft dropped more than 300 tons of bomb on London docks and densely packed streets of the East End. The fires they started led the way for 250 more bombers, which attacked between 8 p.m. and dawn. Initially, Lafleur trees based in France heralded most of the night bombing attacks, but soon the whole of Germany's bomber force was limited. All Britain's larger cities, industrial areas and ports were targeted. For 2 months, between 7 September and 12 November, London was spared bombing in only 10 nights. Some 13,000 tons of high explosive and a million incendiaries fell on the cities, killing 13,000 people and leaving over 250,000 homeless. The cost to the Luftwaffe was negligible. Only a handful of Royal Air Force night fighters were fitted with a primitive form of airborne radar. Nor had the Luftwaffe much to fear from the capital's anti-aircraft defenses. 40% of Londoners who went regularly to an air raid shelter at night during a raid. This surprisingly low figure was revealed in a survey of November 1940. The majority of the population stayed in bed or under the stairs. During the Blitz in Britain, many British citizens were affected in more than one way. People had to be aware of the sound of the air raid siren, which means they had to rush to either their own shelter or a public one. A lot of people slept in the underground stations, highly squashed among many others. Others had shelter in their own home or in their garden. When the Blitz began, tens of thousands of Londoners took to living in underground railway stations. Conditions were poor, with serious overcrowding and no sanitary facility, although the authorities slowly introduced improvements such as bunk beds on platforms. The tube was not necessarily a safe haven from the bombing. For example, 111 people died when a bomb sank Bank Station in January 1941. Few sections of the underground, such as Aldwych Station, shown here, were used purely as shelters. In most places, those sleepers shared stations with passengers and trains until service stopped and running at 10:30 p.m. October 1940. On benches on each side, as though sitting and lying on a long streetcar seat, were the people, hundreds of them, as we walked on these streets in 2000s. In addition, there was a rope sleeping form on the wooden floor of the tube, stretched crosswise. Their bodies took up the whole space, so we had to watch closely when we put our feet down between the sleepers. Many of these people were old, wretched and worn old people. People who had never known many of the good things of life, and who were now winding up their days on this earth in desperate discomfort. There were children too, some asleep and some playing. There were youngsters in groups, laughing and talking and even singing. There were smart Alex and there were quiet ones. There were hard-working people middle-aged who had to rise at 5 a.m. and go to work. Some people sat knitting or playing cards or talking, but mostly they just sat. And though it was only 8 p.m., Many of the old people were already asleep. It was the old people who seemed so tragic. Think of yourself at 70 or 80, full of pain of the memories of a lifetime that has probably all been bleak. And then, think of yourself now, traveling at dusk every night to a subway station, wrapping your ragged overcoat about your old shoulder, and sitting on a wooden bench with your back against a curved steel wall, sitting there all night, in nothing and fitful sleep. Think of that as your destiny every night from now on. US War correspondent Ernie Ply, describing Londoners sheltering from the Blitz in Liverpool Street's underground station. During the course of the Blitz between September 1940 and May 1941, 43,000 British civilians were killed, with more than 1 million injured. During the Blitz, around 650,000 children were evacuated from city into the countryside. This was to keep the children safe from bombing, as the Germans did not tend to bomb out of Britain's major city. However, evacuating these children meant they had to be removed from their families. Children would suffer from homesickness, and they would possibly never see their family again. They wouldn't know if any family member had died or anything. The children that did not get evacuated and stayed with their family instead were, however, more at risk of getting bombed than those that did get evacuated. The Blitz vastly affected many families throughout the country, and in many cases split them apart. Children were taken from family to live a several life, whilst their parents worked to help Britain come through the war, and many people were killed or injured. They were very emotional time, and people moral rose and fell. Throughout January and February 1941, the Luftwaffe served to mainland, the pressure on London, the industrial movements, and Britain's western front, the last link in the Atlantic supply chain. By now, the air defense had improved. In March, night fighters shot down 22 bombers, and AA guns claimed 17 more. In May, the fighter claimed 96 kills, the guns 32. The final phase of the Blitz began on 16 April 1941 and reached a climax on 10 May, with a raid on London that left 1/3 of the capital streets impassable and 1,400 civilians dead. But by now, Hitler's strategic priority had changed, and the build-up to the invasion of the Soviet Union was gathering momentum. As a result, 2/3 of the Luftwaffe was transferred to Eastern Europe. Hitler's bombing campaign against Britain had failed. The Blitz didn't pack a big enough punch to bomb the British into surrender. Coventry had been targeted just one, and Londonshire side had 7. Civil morale had not been crumbled. In the saying of the time, Britain could take it.